Elizabeth I, often celebrated as the Virgin Queen and the figurehead of England's Golden Age, is typically seen through the lens of her political acumen and diplomatic mastery. However, beneath this iconic image lies a side of her personality that is far less angelic. Often overshadowed by her impressive reign, Elizabeth's temperament revealed a fiercer, more volatile side, one that was not unlike her father, Henry VIII. While her public persona was that of a composed, strategic ruler, Elizabeth was known to harbor a nasty streak when it came to those who crossed her. Her ability to project an image of calm and rationality often concealed a sharp and ruthless nature, especially in matters of betrayal and disloyalty. Much like Henry, Elizabeth did not hesitate to display her anger when she felt threatened or disrespected. Her wrath was legendary, and those who underestimated her temper learned the hard way that she would stop at nothing to preserve her authority. One of the most striking examples of her fiery nature was her handling of rivals and traitors. Elizabeth could be exceedingly vengeful, and her decisions were often final and unforgiving. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, after years of political maneuvering, is just one instance where her ruthlessness came to the forefront. The Virgin Queen, despite her seemingly serene public image, did not shy away from making harsh, unyielding choices when necessary. Moreover, Elizabeth's relationships with her court were often fraught with tension. She was quick to dismiss those who failed her or became too ambitious, showing little tolerance for disobedience. Yet, her temper was balanced by a strategic intellect that kept her rule firmly in place for over 4 decades. This combination of cold, calculated decision-making and occasional bursts of fiery anger is part of what made Elizabeth such a formidable monarch. In the end, ElizabethI's complex personality, part political genius, part fierce ruler, reveals a woman who understood the need for both diplomacy and a readiness to strike when necessary. Far from the angelic image of a virgin queen, Elizabeth's legacy is one that includes a potent blend of both intellect and temper, echoing the commanding force of her infamous father, Henry VIII. Elizabeth I is often admired as a brilliant, composed monarch who ushered in an era of cultural and political prosperity. Yet, her path to power was anything but smooth, and the scars of her turbulent early life left a deep mark on the woman she became. Rather than softening her heart, the tragedies and betrayals she endured in her youth seemed to forge a ruler who was unflinching, cautious, and at times unforgiving. Born to Anne Boleyn and King Henry VIII, Elizabeth's royal status was shattered when her mother was executed for treason and adultery. She was just 2 years old. Branded as illegitimate and removed from the line of succession, Elizabeth's early years were marked by instability, uncertainty, and emotional isolation. While one might expect such experiences to foster empathy, in Elizabeth's case, they did the opposite. They taught her that power was fragile and had to be protected at all costs. As queen, Elizabeth developed a reputation for being calculating and emotionally reserved. She did not easily trust, and she rarely forgave. Betrayal, whether personal or political, was met with swift and often brutal consequences. Those closest to her learned to tread carefully. Even longtime advisors who slipped up could find themselves suddenly out of favor. Her harsh treatment of subjects who challenged her rule, including former allies, reflected a woman shaped by betrayal and loss rather than one softened by them. This hardness was also evident in her handling of threats to the crown. Rivals such as Mary, Queen of Scots, faced not just political exile but fatal outcomes. Elizabeth's rule was guided less by mercy and more by survival instincts honed from a childhood spent navigating dangerous court politics. The girl who had once been cast aside would never again allow herself to be vulnerable. Far from the image of a gentle, compassionate queen shaped by hardship, Elizabeth I emerged as a commanding, sometimes cold leader whose difficult upbringing became a blueprint for resilience and control. Her reign was not defined by tenderness, but by an iron will, one forged in the crucible of a chaotic childhood and sharpened by the endless demands of keeping a crown. Long before Elizabeth I became one of England's most iconic monarchs, she endured a disturbing chapter in her youth that would cast a long shadow over her personal life, particularly her relationships with men. After the death of her father, Henry VIII, Elizabeth went to live with her stepmother, Catherine Parr. It was there, under the same roof, that she encountered Thomas Seymour, Catherine's ambitious and dangerously charismatic husband. Thomas Seymour's behavior toward the teenage Elizabeth was highly inappropriate, even by the looser standards of the Tudor court. He would enter her room early in the morning, tickling her, slapping her on the buttocks, and making suggestive remarks. Sometimes, Catherine Parr would even join in on these encounters, brushing them off as harmless games. But when it became clear that Seymour's interest in Elizabeth was escalating, Catherine sent her away. The scandal that followed, complete with rumors of Seymour's intentions to marry Elizabeth, was a defining moment in her adolescence. Though Elizabeth never spoke openly about the psychological toll of that period, its effects are unmistakable. As queen, she kept an emotional distance from men, no matter how close they became. She surrounded herself with male advisors and courtiers, but maintained strict control over every relationship. Her refusal to marry, despite immense pressure from Parliament and foreign powers, has often been attributed to political strategy, but it also reflected deep-rooted personal caution. Elizabeth learned early on that affection could be a trap, and that male ambition often came with hidden dangers. The trauma of Seymour's manipulation stayed with her, reinforcing her need for autonomy and control. She would rule alone, not because she lacked suitors, but because she refused to let any man hold power over her. In the end, Elizabeth's experience with Thomas Seymour became more than a footnote in her life. It was a catalyst in shaping the Virgin Queen, a sovereign who trusted few, gave little of herself away, and made sure no man could ever undermine her throne. The scandal involving Thomas Seymour was more than just a personal trauma for young Elizabeth. It was an early and painful lesson in the treacherous world of court politics. At only 14, she found herself caught in a web of gossip, suspicion, and scandal that could have easily destroyed her future. Though she emerged unscathed in the eyes of the law, the experience profoundly changed her, teaching her that perception at court could be just as dangerous as reality. As rumors swirled about her supposed flirtation, or even secret intentions, with Seymour, Elizabeth realized that in the royal court, whispers could be deadly. Even without proof, scandal had the power to damage reputations, spark political plots, and end lives. In the wake of the investigation into Seymour's behavior and ambitions, Elizabeth was grilled by authorities and forced to defend herself against damaging insinuations. She held firm, never admitting to anything inappropriate, but the ordeal left her with a lifelong wariness. From that moment on, Elizabeth became sharply aware of how dangerous it was to let others get too close. She understood that the people she surrounded herself with could make or break her. As a result, she developed a knack for reading character and remained cautious in selecting her inner circle. Trust was earned slowly, and even her most loyal advisors were constantly being tested. She kept a watchful eye on everyone, aware that betrayal often came from those who seemed the most devoted. The Seymour scandal shaped not only her personal habits, but also her political style. Elizabeth became a master of appearances. She understood the power of reputation and image, and she controlled hers with precision. She knew that being a woman in power made her vulnerable to all kinds of gossip, so she was always careful, deliberate, and just mysterious enough to keep people guessing. Ultimately, the painful experience with Seymour didn't break her, it refined her. It taught her how to survive in a world where even the hint of impropriety could end a royal career. By learning early how to navigate the dangers of rumor and reputation, Elizabeth transformed herself into one of the most enigmatic and politically savvy rulers in history. During the turbulent reign of Mary I, Elizabeth found herself thrust into a deadly game of politics and religion, not by choice, but by circumstance. As the daughter of Anne Boleyn and a symbol of Protestant hope, Elizabeth became a magnet for those who opposed Mary's Catholic rule. Though she remained outwardly cautious and avoided public alignment with Protestant rebels, her mere existence was enough to make her a threat in the eyes of the crown. When Wyatt's rebellion broke out in 1554, a Protestant-led uprising against Queen Mary, Elizabeth was quickly suspected of complicity. Despite her denials and lack of concrete evidence, she was arrested and sent to the Tower of London, the very fortress where her own mother had been executed. For weeks, Elizabeth lived under the shadow of death, unsure if each day would be her last. It was a harrowing experience that left an indelible mark on her soul. Although she was eventually released due to lack of evidence, the episode transformed her. Elizabeth had seen firsthand how religious fanaticism could divide a nation, fuel paranoia, and lead to injustice. She understood that when religion became a weapon of the state, no one was safe, not even a princess. These experiences planted the seeds of a belief that would later define her reign. Religious tolerance was not only wise policy, it was essential for survival. As queen, Elizabeth did not seek to erase Catholicism or punish those with differing beliefs. Instead, she aimed for a middle path, a moderate Protestant settlement that allowed for some diversity of worship, so long as political loyalty remained with the crown. It was a delicate balance, one born not of idealism, but of hard-earned wisdom. She knew the price of extremism, because she had nearly paid it with her life. Elizabeth's brush with death during Mary's reign didn't harden her into a zealot. It taught her the value of restraint. And in choosing tolerance over vengeance, she not only secured her throne but helped stabilize a fractured England for generations to come. When Elizabeth I ascended the throne in 1558, England was a nation divided and weary from decades of religious turmoil. Her half-sister Mary I had brutally reinstated Catholicism, executing hundreds of Protestants, while their father, Henry VIII, had broken from Rome to establish a separate English church. Elizabeth inherited a kingdom torn between two powerful religious factions, and she knew that choosing one side over the other could reignite rebellion, or worse, civil war. Rather than impose a rigid system, Elizabeth chose a more pragmatic path. She re-established the Church of England, reaffirming Protestantism as the official faith of the land, but with a distinctly moderate tone. Her goal wasn't religious purity, it was national unity. Under the 1559 Act of Uniformity, she reinstated the English Book of Common Prayer, but allowed for some traditional Catholic customs to quietly continue. Crucifixes, candles, and priestly vestments remained in many churches, not because Elizabeth clung to Catholicism, but because she understood the power of compromise. This carefully crafted middle way, often referred to as the Elizabethan religious settlement, was both brilliant and bold. It frustrated hardline Protestants who wanted a more radical reform and disappointed staunch Catholics who hoped for a full return to Rome. But for the vast majority of her subjects, it was a welcome reprieve, a way to move forward without the constant threat of persecution. Elizabeth herself was famously private about her personal beliefs, refusing to let doctrine dominate her rule. "I do not want to make windows into men's souls," she once said, emphasizing loyalty to the crown over uniformity of faith. Her tolerance was not born of indifference, but of political insight. She knew that a queen who ruled a fractured nation must sometimes step carefully rather than stomp. By prioritizing peace over dogma, Elizabeth defused one of the most volatile issues of her time. Her reign didn't eliminate religious conflict entirely, but it set a precedent for a more balanced and inclusive approach, one that kept England from tearing itself apart. Through compromise, Elizabeth ensured that faith served the realm, not the other way around. Elizabeth I was not a woman who tolerated surprises, especially when they came from within her own family. When her cousins, Lady Catherine Grey and later Lady Mary Grey, secretly married without royal permission, the Queen's response was swift, severe, and deeply personal. These weren't just family scandals. They were perceived threats to her crown, and Elizabeth reacted with a mix of political caution and emotional intensity. Catherine Grey, once considered a potential heir by some Protestant factions, married Edward Seymour in secret. When the truth surfaced, Elizabeth was furious, not just because the marriage had taken place without her approval, but because it produced children with royal blood, sparking whispers about alternative claims to the throne. Elizabeth ordered Catherine imprisoned in the Tower of London, where she remained until her death. It was a harsh punishment, one that shocked many, but to Elizabeth, it was a necessary act to neutralize a rival lineage. A few years later, Lady Mary Grey, the youngest of the Grey sisters, also married without the Queen's blessing. Though Mary was physically small and posed little political threat, her secret union still drew Elizabeth's ire. She, too, was placed under house arrest, spending years in virtual exile from court. Why such extreme measures? At the heart of Elizabeth's fury was more than just protocol. Her position as a female ruler was constantly under scrutiny, and the presence of young, fertile women with royal bloodlines posed a direct challenge to her authority. The fear of conspiracies and alternative successions was very real. But beneath the politics, there may have been something more personal, a sting of jealousy, perhaps, or a sense of betrayal. Elizabeth, who had sacrificed personal happiness and chosen not to marry, may have seen her cousin's secret unions as acts of defiance and ingratitude. In punishing Catherine and Mary Grey, Elizabeth sent a clear message: loyalty came first, and ambition, especially from within the royal bloodline, would not be tolerated. It was a lesson written not just in royal decree, but in isolation, sorrow, and the high cost of defying the Virgin Queen. ElizabethI's relationship with Robert Dudley was one of the most talked about romances of the Tudor era. Their bond was unmistakable, deep, affectionate, and enduring. Yet, despite their closeness and the rumors that swirled around them for decades, Elizabeth never married him. Behind that choice lay not just royal duty, but an enormous personal sacrifice, one that may have left emotional scars that echoed in how she treated the marriages of those around her. Robert Dudley was more than a favorite. He was the man Elizabeth loved. From their shared childhood to his rise as Master of the Horse and later Earl of Leicester, Dudley remained by her side. But he was also a man burdened by scandal. His wife's mysterious death cast a dark shadow, making any potential union with the Queen politically explosive. European courts whispered about the impropriety of their relationship, and many of Elizabeth's advisors warned that marrying him would compromise her reputation and endanger her rule. Elizabeth understood this all too well. As a woman on the throne in a world dominated by men, her political survival depended on remaining unattached and above reproach. Marrying Dudley could have ignited factional conflict at home and undermined foreign alliances. And so, with great reluctance, she chose the crown over her heart. This painful decision likely shaped her later responses to the secret or unauthorized marriages of others in her court. When members of her inner circle, particularly women of noble blood, chose to marry without her consent, Elizabeth often responded with fierce disapproval, even punishment. Some historians believe these reactions were fueled not only by political concerns, but by something more personal: resentment. She had denied herself the joys of love and companionship for the sake of duty, and she expected the same unwavering loyalty from those around her. In refusing marriage to the man she loved, Elizabeth reinforced her image as the Virgin Queen, a ruler devoted wholly to England. But the emotional cost was high, and in guarding her throne with such intensity, she also guarded her own heart, expecting her courtiers to follow the same lonely path she had chosen. In the final decades of her reign, Queen Elizabeth I's behavior began to shift. She became more temperamental, more suspicious, and increasingly isolated. While many attribute this change to the pressures of age and rule, there may have been another, more insidious factor at play: her makeup. After surviving a severe bout of smallpox in 1562, Elizabeth turned to heavy lead-based cosmetics to conceal the scars left on her face. But in trying to preserve her image, she may have unknowingly poisoned herself. The white, chalky appearance that became synonymous with the Queen's iconic look came from a mixture called Venetian ceruse, a deadly blend of white lead and vinegar. Applied regularly over many years, this toxic substance was absorbed through the skin, leading to a host of physical and psychological effects. Symptoms of lead poisoning include mood swings, memory loss, irritability, and even aggressive behavior, all of which were increasingly noted in Elizabeth's later life. As her health declined, so too did her temperament. Reports from courtiers describe her as unpredictable, prone to sudden fits of anger, and less tolerant of even minor disobedience. Some historians believe this wasn't simply the result of aging or stress, but a chemical reaction, her beauty regimen quietly eroding her mind. Ironically, in her attempt to mask the visible signs of aging and illness, Elizabeth may have hastened her own decline. The tragedy is that Elizabeth's reliance on these cosmetics was born from necessity as much as vanity. In an era where a female monarch was scrutinized for every wrinkle and flaw, maintaining the illusion of eternal youth was a form of survival. Her image was her power, and she guarded it fiercely. In the end, Elizabeth's striking pale face, framed by her flame-red wigs and extravagant gowns, became more than a symbol of royal majesty. It was also a haunting reminder of the personal cost of power and how even a queen could fall victim to the dangerous beauty standards of her time. Elizabeth I is often remembered as a brilliant ruler who led England through a golden age of exploration, cultural flourishing, and military triumphs, most famously the defeat of the Spanish Armada. But behind the glittering image of Gloriana lies a more complicated legacy, one shadowed by financial hardship, ruthless policies, and a reputation for cruelty toward those who crossed her, especially women. Though Elizabeth maintained a relatively stable monarchy, the cost of wars, court pageantry, and overseas ventures put a tremendous strain on the royal treasury. Her government resorted to unpopular methods of raising funds, including forced loans and the sale of monopolies, which bred resentment among both nobility and commoners. By the end of her reign, the kingdom was burdened with debt, and economic discontent simmered beneath the surface of her otherwise celebrated rule. In Ireland, Elizabeth's efforts to enforce English rule were marked by brutality. Her armies employed scorched earth tactics, burning crops, slaughtering livestock, and starving civilian populations into submission. The 9 Years' War, 1594 to 1603, was particularly savage, leaving deep scars on Anglo-Irish relations for generations. While these actions were justified by the crown as necessary for national security, they revealed a darker, more unforgiving side of Elizabeth's leadership. Even within her court, the queen was known for her unforgiving nature. Women who married without her consent, especially those of noble blood, were often punished with exile, imprisonment, or public disgrace. Elizabeth, who had sacrificed personal happiness for political survival, appeared to view these acts not just as disobedience, but as personal betrayals. Her wrath could be swift and severe. Though Elizabeth's reign is rightfully remembered for its achievements, it was also defined by the costs of maintaining power in a dangerous and divided world. Her brilliance as a ruler cannot be denied, but neither can the shadows that followed in her wake. ElizabethI's legacy as one of England's greatest monarchs didn't solidify the moment she died. It grew and transformed over time, shaped not only by her accomplishments, but by what came after her. While she left behind a kingdom that was powerful and admired, her almost mythical status, the Virgin Queen, the wise and radiant Gloriana, was heavily influenced by the reign of her successor, James I. In many ways, the contrast between them made her shine even brighter in the eyes of history. James I, who succeeded Elizabeth in 1603, struggled to win the same admiration or authority. His reign was marked by growing tensions with Parliament, financial mismanagement, and a disconnect with the English people. Many viewed him as an outsider, more interested in the affairs of Scotland and his lavish court than the needs of his new kingdom. His awkwardness, extravagance, and perceived favoritism toward male courtiers made him an easy target for criticism. In comparison, Elizabeth began to look like a golden icon. The difficulties of James's rule made people nostalgic for her firm leadership, her eloquence, and her ability to command respect. Over time, her flaws, her temper, her ruthlessness, her rigid control, were softened or forgotten, while her virtues were celebrated and exaggerated. Artists, poets, and historians romanticized her image, portraying her not just as a ruler, but as a national symbol of strength, wisdom, and purity. This idealized version of Elizabeth was carefully cultivated. She became the embodiment of a powerful yet virtuous monarch, one who rose above personal desire for the good of her people. The political struggles under James made it easy to long for the days of Elizabethan stability and grandeur, even if those memories were selectively edited. As a result, Elizabeth's historical reputation was as much a reflection of her own savvy as it was a reaction to what followed. The disappointment in her successor helped transform her into a near-legendary figure, one whose reign became a benchmark for greatness and whose image, polished by time and contrast, continues to captivate the world.